Welcome to They Are Waiting for Us from Forbes Books, the podcast that explores how education can transform lives and communities, featuring conversations with change agents who are making a difference in education, from parents and advocates to teachers and leaders. Here's Dr. Lisa Andrew.
I'm back with Sofía De Jesús, the author of Applied Computational Thinking with Python and a seasoned educator with over 20 years of experience. She's been sharing her journey in building inclusive and equitable STEM programs and discussing the challenges of integrating technology effectively in education. Sofía, you've touched on your work at the Carnegie Mellon University Computer Science Academy. In part one, you had a heartfelt moment when discussing your focus.
Yeah, so one of the things that I always say is nothing is always 100% accessible, because even if it's accessible to some, it's not accessible to all. So trying to get the perfect tool for everything, that's just impossible. So instead, it's how do we make it more accessible, and every time push that needle forward. And then also knowing I have to be able to shift to some of these things. Maybe it's not as much graphics. Maybe it is a different course that's more appropriate for that particular student. For example, and I will give you an example, our college course, we have a college level course that's for high school students, has less graphics than our CS1. And I think it's more accessible for our vision impaired students. So there's thoughts that we have, and of course, we're not all the way there yet, and we will discuss all of the accessibility pieces again when we do every iteration of our courses, because we learn and laws change, and then we learn more, and the more people use our curriculum, the more we learn to make it better. But at some point we will talk about hey, can we add a couple exercises that are not graphics based, because that way we have options and teachers can use whatever they need to use in their classrooms based on the students they have. So there's pieces like that. But I also, as part of CMUCS Academy, I do work with other organizations. So I am a member of CS Access, which is now a committee inside of CSTA, which is the Computer Science Teachers Association. I've worked with districts to help them understand accessibility and how important it is. I push to advocate for my biggest fear, which is a lot of districts and states, et cetera, are counting as we offer computer science when they have one elective where 30 students out of 1,600 go every year, and they're counting that as a school that offers CS.
Absolutely.
But that's a problem. And then they're but at least we're serving some students. And here's my problem with that phrase. It's that when we go down that route, we are widening the gaps, because we can't keep pushing that further ahead to we'll deal with that later, and decades go by and we're still way behind. So part of my work in equity and advocacy is making sure that when we're implementing these things or advocating for computer science as a requirement for graduation, that we're requiring it and also providing all of the needed tools for all of the students in your district. It cannot also be we'll make an exception for some students so that they can graduate without it, because again, they're never going to be represented in the workforce. And then we keep creating tools, right? And one of the things that I've always said is if the people who are in computer science are not those vision impaired students, hard of hearing, other motor issues, et cetera, everything, then I'm not the right person to create the tools that will help them, because I don't know what that experience is. So they have to be part of it. I need to open it up so that they can be part of that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think we've, in a sense, come full circle, because then it's funding, because I know a lot of the districts here where we are will say, well, we don't have the money to run more than one CS class. And two, we don't have, there's not a teacher pipeline for CS. And so then it's hey, we don't have the money, we don't have the staff, so we're doing the best that we can. And we just continue to accept this scarcity mindset instead of saying, well, that's not acceptable, so we are going to offer 5 more sections, and then what can we do so that the folks that are teaching that coursework are capable, right? Instead of having all of these roadblocks to it, it's like, solve it. Like, take the time and solve it, because it shouldn't be optional, right? And that's why we turn to legislation, right? We turn to legislation because we want to make this law, and then districts will then complain because they don't have enough money, rightfully so here, because the way that we're funded in the state of California is totally unequal and inequitable. But it's like, if we just get at this, and then it shouldn't be something that we should accept, and we should think abundantly about it. So with this idea about accessibility and equity, let's switch gears a little bit now, or a lot of it, to AI. And I like to joke that everyone's talking about AI, but none of us know what we're talking about. So we're just going to keep talking until we talk to each other enough. We're going to keep iterating so that we keep at it until we land on something. But, a lot of folks are thinking that AI is going to narrow the gap because it's going to allow access. So let's kind of dig a little bit into that. And once upon a time, meaning during my time in education, we feared the calculator. I was a teacher when the calculator was introduced, and then we feared the internet. Oh my gosh, the internet, everyone's going to cheat and do da-da-da. And now there's this fear of AI. And I'm not saying it's a misplaced fear. I'm saying it's something that needs to be explored and understood, and not just feared. But, some believe that this fear of AI is because its design is to keep a hierarchical structure of survival of the strongest minds, who then can assimilate Western ideas. Right? So it's like AI is actually going to perpetuate institutional racism. You love this question. Look at that. I wish the listeners could see the smile. It's going to perpetuate institutional racism, institutional oppression. And so it's like fear of access, fear of not of access. So with all that being said, and I know I've loaded it up to where I know this is where you live, how do you see AI impacting K-12 education in the coming years?
So let me start by saying, there's two camps into, and again, I'm just gonna make sure that we are talking about Gen AI specifically.
Yes.
Generative AI is the one where the large language models have all this data. And we're gonna get into that in a second, but there's all this data that was fed into it, and then it just spits out that data paraphrased. I'm gonna say it that way. There's really good reading that comes from Dr. Emily Bender on stochastic parrots. And anybody who wants to talk about AI should have at least read her work. I also think unmasking AI is extremely important. I'm going to give resources first before I get into my opinions here. And they're my opinions. They're based on my readings, and they're based on some reality that we need to talk about. Because there's usually two camps, and I'm not in either, because I think both of those camps, it's like dividing things that are in a spectrum into two things, right? So doom believes that we're going to all die because AI is going to take over. AI isn't intelligent. It's not intelligent. And we need to I know that it's called artificial intelligence, but it isn't intelligence. It is just an algorithm, and it follows instructions. That's what it is. Some people believe that it can be more, that it can actually learn to be more and become sentient. And one of the things that I will say is there's a rock by that stop sign down the street that's been there for 50 years, and it's still a rock, and it doesn't move, and it doesn't talk. Because it's a thing. And it's a thing that does whatever. If it moves, it's because I moved it as a human being. It's the same with artificial intelligence. If I move it as a human being, it'll do things differently because my algorithm makes it do things differently. But it doesn't decide. It follows instructions. And then it creates these neural pathways. But again, that's based on the algorithm. It's not and some people who don't understand it then make it seem more magical than it actually is. But then there's those that are all hype, it's going to solve every problem, right? The environment, which is a key point that we need to talk about. Instead of Google, Meta, Microsoft, etc., coming up with solutions for the amount of energy and resources and water that they're using, they're saying now, we'll let AI figure it out. AI does not have that capacity. And Dr. Joy Boulomini, who is the author of Unmasking AI, and I'm paraphrasing, so I hope I get this right, but these are our problems. We created them. They're human problems, so we can't ask machines to fix them for us. They're social problems that we created, so we need to figure this out, especially if we put this in schools. And to give an idea about, like, you know, is it ethical to use, et cetera, I'm like, you know, before we even go into that, if we go into every school, the millions of students who are in schools, and everybody in that school is like, once a day generates an image or whatever, every time you generate an image, to put it in terms that people will understand, it's about the same energy use as charging your phone fully. But it takes a second when you're using AI. Right now, in the cities that they have these like massive servers, et cetera, they are depleting the water, energy, resources from those places. And we're still not using it at capacity in schools at all. So before we do and say like, well, they need it, we got to figure out how not to kill our planet. Because what's the point of technology if we're going to not be here to enjoy it? That's first and foremost. Second, again, it's the same as without tech. What are you trying to solve? Because right now they're trying to throw it at everything. It's like, let's see what sticks. And there's not a lot of great uses. Like, you know, let's look at the Google AI overview. It's awful. I mean, awful to the point of being a joke. You know, I've seen so many, and we've all seen the ones that go viral, like the pizza that use glue, or, you know, it's an ingredient, you know, like use some glue in it. But there's, you know, on my daily, like, I search, and I finally learned how to search without it. But it's there glaring at me, and I'm like, that's all wrong. So there's a lot of uses that are not helpful. And there's other uses that are a little helpful. But when we're talking about education, I want something that's actually going to have an impact and going to make things better for a population that needs it, right? So good uses are for accessibility, and specific uses for accessibility, like the ones that Dr. Maya Israel is researching at the University of Florida. So there are people trying to figure out what that is. And we need to do that before we go into a school and sell it.
So you think that we should just slow our roll?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So K-12 should just slow your roll.
Well, yes, because right now it's an ed tech tool, right? Because people are like, it's going to be needed for all. I don't know about you, but I find it super easy to use. Like AI it's not a calculator that you needed to learn how to use. It's not a programming language. It's just hey, you asked a question, you get some answers. I always tell people, hey, use it for things you know, because if you use it for things you don't know, you won't catch the mistakes, and they have a lot of mistakes. Because the thing doesn't know what's factual or not. It's the same reason why, like, I am so against Conamigo. Like, I will say that out loud. Because it's bad. It is bad use of technology. We know if a student learns something wrong, unlearning that and then relearning it correctly is much harder. Much, much harder.
We're back to the science and art. The science
Yes.
and art of teaching. And I don't know that AI is an art.
It isn't. It's a tool, like an ed tech tool. And it's not even a good one. So, like, make it better. You know, and this is why I make the distinction between Gen AI and AI. There are phenomenal AI projects happening, you know, but those are being fed specific data about a specific subject trying to solve a specific thing. It is not a Gen AI. Gen AI is this, we haven't even talked about the ethics of it all, where they stole all of the creative data, videos, writings of people who are not even aware, and those who are aware are suing because that's their work, their life's work. And these companies are filling their pockets with money and not paying creatives in the name of serving society. But I don't know how they're serving us because, again, these tools are maybe saving you. It doesn't save me a single minute because, again, I only use it for things I know. And most of the time, I'm trying to fact check whether that is correct or not because, like I said, if I know the thing, I'm going to find the mistakes really quickly. And then it's the other part where you talked about the, westernizing of things. One of the examples that I use a lot is like, I guarantee most people, like the majority, don't read what I read. I for fun, I read, vampires and witches. It's been a thing. And most people, that's not their cup of tea and whatever. But that's what I like. And I like certain specific styles of writing, and other people like other styles of writing. But it becomes easier to catch AI writing because it is very specific.
Absolutely.
And then if we were all writing the same way, it gets repetitive, it gets boring. Like, we don't all like the same thing, so our writing can't all be the same. It's just not worth it.
What I think is interesting is right now, I just went on a conference tour. I don't know, September is the month where everybody wants to hold their conference, right? And so I was gone for like 2 weeks, like rotating through these conferences. And every theme was being authentic, being an authentic leader, being your authentic self, your authentic team. And I thought, how do I juxtapose this authenticity and AI? And this was really, really interesting. It's like this resurgence of authenticity and this, everyone's talking about AI, but we don't know what we're talking about, but we're going to talk about it thing. And then there were some sessions where you were talking about being authentic and AI at the same time. And I'm just like, my brain just cannot compute, it just cannot compute what this is. And, while prompt engineering, mastering prompt engineering is a skill, it is, okay, I know this isn't what I wanted to say, so I'm going to do this. I don't know that a fifth grader yet, I don't know that me, a 60-year-old woman yet even knows. I mean, obviously I'm asking the question maybe because I don't know the answer. Am I going to know, is it in the realm or not of plausibility? But I can tell you, I have some employees that I know every email they send me is AI generated. And it's like, what? Like a 2-line email to me? You have to use AI? Then I start wondering, who is that over there?
And the thing is, like, our students don't learn anything if the answers are right there for them. And if the answers are bad, they can't catch that they're bad. And then there's also the terms of service. They're not supposed to be using it under 13, and they need parental consent. And we can argue this and I have, but parental consent in the realm of AI is similar to social media. Teachers cannot accept that consent on behalf of parents, which is called in loco parentis. They're allowed to do that for edtech, things in school that are approved by the district. But AI, the terms of service, are much more akin to social media than they are for edtech tools. So that you can't, because it says that explicitly. And yet, Conamigo, for example, is being built on these LLMs. So they have to abide by the terms of service of the LLM they're built on. And yet, here we are.
Yes. So let's push a little bit on this idea about AI actually being a gatekeeper. So many times a student's knowledge level is a gatekeeper. So you don't know your multiplication facts yet, so you can't move on to division. You don't know, I remember as a first grade teacher, you didn't get to move on to multiple syllabic words until you got vowel, consonant, vowel, right? Or consonant, vowel, consonant. So as knowledge level being a gatekeeper for access to the higher level of blooms, like application and then analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, Do you foresee a time when students will be expected to have less and less knowledge because I can Google that, I can have a calculator tell me that basic knowledge, and then the gates of higher order thinking are now open to them? I mean, could that be a possible positive of this?
I think that that's a negative. So part of this is, let's go back to calculators, because calculators come up fairly often. And I always push back because they're like, well, it didn't break anything. And I'm like, it broke everything. So let's talk about that, because I was a math teacher, and I've done a lot of research in math, and I've done a lot of research in terms of like the effects of calculators. And part of it is the calculator made it easier for students to solve an algorithm, and it made it so that they don't understand it. So a lot of students, for example, will solve a system of equations, but then you present them with the graph and they don't make the connection that it's the same thing. They don't know what it means. They don't know that the solution is a point of intersection. They don't process that. And then they get to college and we have all these professors saying students aren't as prepared, and they're complaining about the depth of knowledge of the students, but they won't make that connection. Like, a lot of people are like, no, but we don't want to blame calculators. And it's not that I want to blame calculators or not. It's that I want to say there's a problem. There is a depth of knowledge problem. The students can solve the algorithm, but don't necessarily understand it. We've ignored child development when we say, for 97% of the population, abstract reasoning doesn't develop until after puberty. But now we're asking them to do algebra and geometry before puberty, and asking them to understand it and then apply it later. And a lot of students get stuck, then they hate math, and then they don't even pursue the things that they were interested in because they got stuck in the math because we taught it too early. So we started removing things. We started removing truth tables and logic processing and all of that stuff from mathematics, which is why I do think that STEM is important, because now we can add it back in with other things, with STEM specifically, in ways that make sense to students. But saying that calculators didn't break the system, I mean, that's just a little too simplistic. Yes, we can live with calculators, and there's a way to teach with them, but we cannot replace certain things. We cannot replace the reasoning. We cannot replace and I think that having too much in your hands too soon creates it's like this fake thing where students, they seem to know more, but they know less. It's the same issue with like calligraphy. Like, somebody said, like, we don't need to teach calligraphy because we use computers now. But there's research that shows just how much your brain develops just by the act of writing. And so we look at the research, we see the research, but we want the easy way out. And it feels like that's where we're going with AI. It's like, it's just yet another thing that's going to make it easier to do certain things. But in the long run, we have a population that is no longer able to process. And we need a population, like, it's the same thing, like, we don't need creatives as much, which was something that was said by Mira Murati when she was still at OpenAI. Creatives are everything. Every advancement in technology has a creative that started it. A lot of our technology looks like our old sci-fi movies. Somebody wrote something that was really, really cool, and somebody else made it happen. Those are creatives. Creatives come up with those things. They come up with the ideas. They come up with all of the things that we now interact with. If you take away their ability to create, you replace it by something that just regurgitates, then we're never going to have new ideas. We're never going to be able to move forward. So we need to be so thoughtful about how we use the tools and when we use the tools. And again, if we start from the what is it, what's the problem, then we do better, because we are choosing a tool that matches a need. And that's the same for accessibility. That's the same for everything. But we can't force the tool on everybody and say, like, well, they're going to use it anyway. I mean, they use a whole lot of things anyway. We don't teach it.
Well, I think that that's a great place to end on this up of the creative and on being creative and the value of the creative. And so we're going to end our discussion here. I know I could probably talk to you for the next 10 days. But Sofía, if folks wanted to get in touch with you to find out more about you and your work, what should they do?
So they can find me online. It's fairly easy at Carnegie Mellon. So they can find me there. There's an email that you can use. It's sdejesus@andrew.cmu.edu. And next month, I'll be relaunching my site, which is thenerdygeek.org. So I'm nerdy and I'm a geek. And so that's my site. So there will be information there about my speaking engagements and where I'm at and at any given moment.
Oh, great. Thank you. So I thank you so much for taking time to chat with me today, and I wish you all the best and hope that you continue to be wildly successful and keep doing it. And so listeners, if anything that was shared today resonated with you and you would like to continue the conversation with me, please send your thoughts through my contact page on drlisaandrew.com.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been They Are Waiting for Us. If you want to learn how to create economic opportunity through equal access to quality education and create an extraordinary learning environment focused on everyone realizing their full potential, go to drlisaandrew.com. They Are Waiting for Us is a production of Forbes Books.